So I was, I was on the hills yesterday, as I am most days, and yeah, it was a beautiful day. It was warm. The sun was out, and I was like, yeah, I want to get a wee bit sun kissed. Let's get up on the hills now, rather than later. Quite often I'll go up last thing in the evening, but I went up, took my shoes off, took my top off, feel the wind, feel the breeze, feel the sun. And I hadn't got very far. I was just walking along the ridge, and I saw a man sat down, just kind of like looking out across the view. And he was smoking a roller. And I don't smoke so much these days, but I kind of felt like, yeah, I'd like a smoke. So I approached him and I said, hey, I don't suppose you got a spare cigarette, can I have a roll up with you? And he said, yeah, sure. And he threw me his tobacco tin and he said, I know you. And I said, do you? He said, yeah, we've met before. He said, you gave me a copy of your book. And I said, yeah, I recognize you. The last time I saw him, he was about 6 months earlier, and he was all sort of wrapped up in his sleeping bag. He was homeless, and he was in the bus shelter at the bottom of the hills. And I saw him there, and I approached him and said, how are you doing? And we chatted a little bit, and I said, I'm just going for a walk, but I'll bring you something back on my way back round. So I stopped off at my car, and I've always got a few copies of my book in there. And he was reading a book when I approached him. His face was just visible out of his sleeping bag. And he was reading this book. It was cold. And I always carry some nuts in my car for, in case I get a bit peckish, and usually got some chewing gum and a little bit of money for the car parking change. So I got a little bit of money and some nuts and a couple of chewing gums and a copy of my book, and I went back. And I said, would you like, I said, you don't have to have this book, but if you think you might read it, then you're really welcome to it. And he said, yeah, thank you. And we exchanged a few words, and I remember him, he ate the nuts like he was hungry, he just kind of like started shoveling them down. And anyway, yeah, it's funny how life goes, isn't it? This was a guy who, I'd met 6 months earlier, and here we are again, on my sacred Malvern Hills. And I said, did you read the book? He said, yeah. He said, I liked it. He said, I haven't got it now. I've left it. I left it in the homeless shelter. He said, maybe somebody else will read it. And I said, hey, I like that. That's really good. I like my book always feels like a seed, and that I love it when it goes off to different places, and to think that, yeah, it's there in that homeless shelter, and perhaps somebody will read it and gain a little inspiration from it. That would be sweet. But I sat down with him anyway, and he was looking pretty anxious, and he had this big beard, and it was hot, and he was kind of sweaty and that. He said, I've lost my bedroll. He said, I stashed it in the bracken somewhere and I can't find it. He says, I'm just stopping to have a smoke. And I said, you'll find it. And I said, sometimes, when we look for things too hard, we can't find them. And then when we relax and just kind of let go, things show up. But we got to talking anyway, and it just became really quite clear that he wasn't in a great place. And I said, can I share a few bits of wisdom that have come to me recently? Because there seems to be this pattern, and what I'm being asked to do is to inspire men to have the courage to feel what it is that they need to feel. I said, you might not fully understand that, or you might not get that, but I just felt the need, to share it with you. Because I always kind of feel, when I'm working with the young people that I work with, I say kind of deep stuff sometimes, and I think, well, perhaps that teenager in front of me won't really get what I'm saying, but the old ancient soul inside them, perhaps it will, they'll get it. So I was talking, we were talking a little bit, and he was saying how he was struggling a bit, really, and he said, I said, it's good to feel what you need to feel, and he said, yeah, but you don't know who to talk to, because you'll talk to somebody and then they stab you in the back, or they'll use what you've shared if you're vulnerable, or use it against you. And I said, well, yeah, I guess that's a possibility, but I said, you don't always need to, to talk to feel. Sometimes you can just feel the sensations and you can do the work by yourself. But he got talking anyway, and I think maybe I said to him, I said, well, you can talk to me, and people do talk to me. Random strangers start opening up, and he really started opening up, and oh, my heart just went out to him. He was talking about his father, and how his father had been an alcoholic and been violent, and towards him, and how his father had wanted to come and see him, but he said, I can't see him. There's too much pain, and I remembered my journey with my father, and how I realized that when we don't get on with our father, when we're angry with our father for not giving us what we thought that we should have had, when we're pissed off with people, we're pissed off with ourselves. And I guess what really helped facilitate my coming to peace with my father was realizing, if I want to integrate my inner masculine and I want to be at peace with myself, then I have to forgive my father, and I have to make peace with my father, because he's not, although he's an external father, he's also an internal father. I have to make peace with my mother and my father in the world. That is the invitation, because as I do that, I heal that masculine and feminine within myself. And I started, I shared some of that stuff with this guy, and you can see he was kind of scratching his head and thinking about it. And there was that, there's that part that I wanted to rescue him, I wanted to fix him. I didn't want him to be in the pain that he was in. I said, where are you sleeping tonight? He said, I'm not sure yet. But, it was warm, and I knew he'd be okay, and he'd be out under the stars, and he'd be, if not on the earth, near to the earth. And he was, running away. He was hiding from the pain of his childhood. And he shared how he drank. He said, it's crazy. My father was an alcoholic, and I'm an alcoholic. He said, I drink to forget. And he said, but I can't even handle being around people that drink. He said, they just do my head in, and I have to leave. So, and he mentioned a few times, he said, I'd like a copy of your book again. And I said, well, we'll see what happens. I gave you a copy. We'll see what happens. I don't know if he thought I was going to go down to the car and get him another copy, but I'm a kind of big believer in tough love, and I could see some sort of victim stuff in him. He wanted something else from me, and my thing was, you've had one copy, you chose to, let it go. So, we have that need to help people, but sometimes we just have to not help them. Not helping them and allowing them to sort things out for themselves and work things out for themselves is sometimes, what people need. And yeah, I didn't feel that it right to go and give him something else. And I didn't even feel the need to help him look for his stuff. I felt that, he was talking about that, and it was like, I could feel this pull, like, oh, I'll help you find it, we'll sort it out. But also the hills were calling me, and I knew, I had a kind of limited time on the hills, and my legs wanted to start moving, and I wanted to get going. But so I stood up, and I didn't offer to help him find his stuff. I said, "You'll find it." And as I sort of, I thanked him for the smoke, and I shook his hand, and I said, "Remind me of your name," because I always think it's important to know somebody's name. When I meet somebody, I like to know their name. We exchange names, and his name is Rem. He spoke with a foreign accent, maybe Eastern European or something like that. But yeah, I shook his hand and I said, go well. And as I got up and sort of walked away a little bit, I just turned around and said, lots of love. And he looked up at me. He said, yeah, that's something that's really missing in my life. Like, that's in short supply, love. And I said, Rem, look at me a minute, man. And he looked up and he looked at me, and he looked me in the eyes. And I said, you know something? I love you. I love you, man. You take care of yourself and I'll see you around. He said, yeah, thank you. And I wandered off. I wandered off up the hill, and I left Rem sat there. And I did. And I do. I love that guy. He's a kind of reflection of myself. He's me a few years back, 5 years, 10 years, I don't know. Everybody we meet is kind of like a reflection of us, and because we're all on the same journey. And, those parting words that we shared, it's all about love, isn't it? We're all looking for love. We're all healing those mother-father wounds, that trauma that got trapped inside us when we were young. We're all on our journey home. We're all scared to open up to people because we've been hurt in the past, and these walls that we build around our hearts to protect ourselves. Or we do what Rem did and just disappeared, and just to be on his own because being with people is just too painful. And I was conscious that I didn't leave him with anything physical. But I like to think that, maybe I planted a little seed of love inside him. And at least he knows that one person loves him. Whether he knows it or not, whether he thought I was joking or whatever, my heart is open, and that love is there for that man. I don't know where he is now. I wonder what he's doing now. I hope he found his bedding. I'm sure he did. But, we have so many opportunities just in our day-to-day life, just to share a little bit of love, and it's so easy, really, and if everybody just shared a little bit of love and was kind to strangers, which I don't believe in. I don't believe in strangers. Strangers are just friends we haven't met yet, or strangers are people whose stories we haven't heard yet. And when we start sharing our stories and being a little vulnerable and opening a little, we realize that we're all living different versions of the same story. There are no strangers. There are really no others. So yeah, that's my little story of what happened on the hills yesterday. fucking the system with love. You know, Rumi says there are hundreds of ways to kneel and kiss the ground. Perhaps there are hundreds of ways to fuck the system with love. Because it's love is the thing that transforms and undoes the system, the separateness, the disconnection, the sort of rigidity of it, the prison bars of it, the judgments and shames and the shoulds and the oughts and the, you know, all these crazy stories, really, you know, they're just stories. They're stories that we've heard over and over again, and because we've heard them over and over again, they kind of become part of us and we think that they're true. But there's an awful lot of undoing taking place, and the old stories are falling away. Kind of seeing through it. The story of religion. You know, there's the story of relationships. You know, they talk about how, you know, there's this idea that we have, you're either kind of celibate monk or you're in a relationship. And the ground in the middle is either you're a slut or a player, or there's something dark or wrong with that. But I'm curious, increasingly curious, and about that, you know, that ground in the middle, that space in the middle of, I believe that there is a different way of relating and being together. It can't be, you know, we're just back to that polarity of celibate or in a relationship, in a marriagey type thing. I believe, and I know, and I believe it's my experience that I can love and be in love with more people than just one. When you think about it, it's a ridiculous concept, isn't it? How ridiculous. There are billions of people on the planet, all different facets of the divine. But the story says we're only allowed to have some sort of romantic love for one. There's more to it than that. There is more to it than that. It's not black and white. So those stories are falling away. You know, I think maybe that there was a time when we were androgynous, and maybe that we're returning to something like that. Maybe that's what's happening with all these young people, you know, that feel they've been born into the wrong bodies, and these gender issues. I can't remember all the sort of technical names, but there's less polarity taking place between the masculine and the feminine. There's this ground in the middle. And maybe, you know, maybe it's just part of that letting go of duality. The whole duality story seems to be falling away. Right and wrong, good and bad, up and down. The further down I travel, the further in, the more paradoxical it all gets, and the less polarity there is, and the less duality. Everything is kind of like merging and swirling, and yeah, you know, it's kind of sort of a bit like the yin yang. Both are contained within the other, but we always see that yin yang so 2D. But, you know, it's kind of 5D, 6D, 7D, where it's swirling and moving and changing and shaping and morphing. And what we perceive with our senses is just the tiniest tip of the iceberg. What we perceive with our senses is just the tiniest tip of the iceberg. It's like it's a little pond, and beyond beyond the doors of perception, beyond what we can perceive, is an infinite, limitless ocean. So we just need to keep letting go of the old stories, surrendering, opening, being tender, being vulnerable. And yet, not all the time. There are, nothing's absolute. But that seems to be a big part of it for me. Question everything. And don't question stuff expecting the clear answer, but just question. Just question. And see what happens. Because the questions just kind of seem to undo stuff. They kind of like loosen the knot, it's like all tight together, but when we start questioning, it opens up space. A beautiful woman shared a couple of questions with me recently, which I really love. And one of those questions is, how do things get better than this? And I really love that question. It's a good question to work with. I've got this thing where when I'm in the bath, and I'm in the bath a lot at the moment because there's just so much weird energy stuff and so much stuff happening in my body, that I used to have a sort of Epsom salt bath like once a week or something, but I'm kind of having one every other day at the moment. I just feel like there's so much purging and clearing, and feels like my body's recalibrated. So I'm in the bath quite a lot. And I do this thing where I sort of get under the water and, I'll repeat powerful words or sentences or whatever, because when I say them, it all vibrates in the water and I can feel it all vibrating. It's also kind of like amplified. So yeah, I'm lying in my bath with just my mouth sort of out and my ears under the water, and I will say in loads of different tones, how do things get better than this? How do things get better than this? And I can feel it all sort of vibrating in my body, and it just feels really good. You should try it. Try some positive affirmations underwater in the bath. I'm sure Masaru Emoto, who's done all this research about water and the power of water, would have something to say about it. And the other question that I really like, that was also given to me by this lady, is what other magic is possible? What other magic is possible? And it's funny because, when I met her and she introduced me to that question, there's just been so much magic going on, and I guess for me, I define magic as something that I can't really get my head around. It's something that, it's not logical. It doesn't fit in with, what we've been taught and the senses and 3D world and all that sort of stuff. So if you can, it helps if you've just got one little thing, that magical thing that happened, and use that as your foundation and ask the question from that place. What other magic is possible? Because it seems like, the universe then responds, And I don't know, I guess some people would say, well, it was coincidence that I met that man, Rem, the homeless guy, on the hills again 6 months later. But I call that magic. I call that magic. We were meant to meet again. Why was I up there on the hills right at that point? I have some beautiful encounters on those hills. Well, every time there are beautiful encounters with the sky and the wind and the trees and the buzzards And sometimes I kind of forget actually and I kind of think, oh, there's nobody else on the hills. That's great. That's even better. But I've met some beautiful people, and I just like to think of it as magic, meeting Rem today. I was homeless myself, and I guess he would help remind me of the journey that I've walked, the pilgrim who's travelled a tough road and found love along the way. That's me. Aren't I blessed? Aren't I blessed? We're all blessed. Even the shitty stuff's a blessing when we see it, when we really see the opportunity in it and how it's guiding us to move away from something or towards something, kind of like a sort of inner guidance system. So yeah, what other magic is possible, and how do things get better than this? Well, I guess things get better than this as we keep on fucking the system with love. In case you haven't noticed, I quite like saying that. I'm quite pleased with myself for that one. Fucking the system with love. Fucking the system with love. Fucking the system with love, man. Yeah. So I think that's probably quite enough of Miguel for now, for this second Facebook Live. Thank you for being there, for being out there. I can see all these little hearts and smiley faces and stuff whizzing around the screen, whizzing up. So much love. Take good care of yourselves, and I'll see you around Facebook, or maybe even I might even see you in real life. Wouldn't that be bizarre? Random, real human beings. All right, lots of love. Bye bye.